do a quick little animation of just your robot casually walking, just to make sure before you sort of get really hardcore into doing your final. If there's any issues with your rig, you can catch those. Also, just get a little bit of practice with animating a human character if you've not done that before. Again, before you start your final. So basically, this is more or less like about 5 seconds of animation where your robot is just sort of walking across the floor. What I'm expecting to see is effectively five steps of your robot. I'm not going to be like super picky about the timing, but a step is going to be, so first step, right foot, left foot, second step, right foot, left foot, first step. So like each step, both of your feet should be moving. Yes.
Can he prance?
No. In my heart, yes. But no, for this assignment, that was actually going to be another thing. I would like just a basic walk. Don't do anything crazy with skipping or crawling. If you want to make it maybe more of like an upbeat walk where he's just like doing something, but yeah.
Like moonwalking.
No. My God. Moonwalking.
So I can't make him scuttle like a spider along the ground with like the head just cranked up.
No. Although I will say, fun fact, so when I was shooting reference for my final for this class, my main robot was like a little soda can with legs.
Yes.
So for reference, I tied a laundry hamper to my stomach, got on my back, and crab walked around like a crazy person. It was completely useless for reference, but it was very funny. I looked up spider pictures online. Anyway.
You have the video?
No. Well, probably somewhere. If I find it, I will bring it in for you.
Wow.
It's worth it. But anywho, so back to requirements. So this is not a walk cycle. Your robot should be moving across the floor from point A to point B, not just sort of like hovering over the origin, doing like the treadmill thing. Again, I'll sort of like go over what that means in the quick demo. You should be shooting reference from this, and I would highly recommend just doing orthographic reference, so like one side shot, one front shot. Again, just to sort of like get a better idea of how the body moves. Since presumably this is the first time most of you guys have done a walk cycle, it's good to just sort of have that there. It kind of removes a lot of the like thinking elements. And again, nothing super crazy like skipping, crawling, dancing. Questions about that? All right. Again, cell phone footage is fine for reference as long as you can actually see what's happening. This particular assignment is not eligible for resubmit. It does sort of count. If you don't do it, you'll have points deducted from your grade. If you do it and put almost no effort into it, it doesn't affect your grade at all. And if you do it really well and like actually put time into it, you can get, you know, some extra points of extra credit if you want them. So this assignment, like, again, you should totally at least do something. The more time you put into it, the more points you're going to get out of it. But that's pretty much that. And I'm going to modify, I think, some of the what to submit stuff. Like, I'm probably not going to ask for your scene file. But I do want your reference and just a play blast of your final animation. And again, I'm probably going to tweak some of this. It's been a while since I've actually looked at this. I'm like, that's unnecessarily harsh. So do double check this. Again, I'll modify this probably like tomorrow. And just like remove some of the stuff I'm asking you to submit. This is the first assignment. Are there any questions about this, how it's being graded, etc.? All right. Apart from this, since we're doing assignment stuff, the other thing is the first work in progress assignment. So presumably, I have a feeling that a lot of this is going to be just sort of like, I found some more things to fix on my rig. But basically, this is, again, sort of like you guys choosing how you want to organize your time for the final. If you want to texture your robot, work on assets for your background, anything like that. If you want to, you know, start animating, it really is up to you. Just make me a list of what you worked on. Otherwise, I'll probably be very confused. And then I do have some specific requirements, like if you've been doing texturing, you know, submit re-renders of what you've been texturing. Same thing for modeling and that kind of thing. These are submitted as journals on Learn. You can still attach files, so if anyone has any issues submitting these, please let me know. I've actually never had journals before, so I would rather figure out those issues earlier and correct them as soon as I find out issues with them. But this is, again, mostly grading on, like, you know, how much stuff you get done, how much effort it seems like you put into things. If you've made 5 cubes for your environment, that's not really going to get many, if any, points. Versus, you know, making a bunch of like actually fully fleshed out models, or like I was experimenting with different ways of making piles of trash, like that kind of thing. You have like lots of trash piles. I'm considering doing maybe some weird demos on like potential ways to make trash piles, because a few people asked about that in the weird survey. Thank you, by the way, for those of you that have filled that out. I will give you extra credit for that at some point. I just need to go through and like tally everyone's name. But that's basically this. What to submit, again, if you could just give me a list of the stuff you worked on so I know what the heck I'm looking at, and then requirements above for like modeling, texturing, animating, whatever. Does that make sense? Sweet. All right. So before we get into the hardcore open lab and like rig troubleshooting, I do want to go through and demo how to do a walk cycle. And before that, I'm going to make y'all get up and walk around. It's going to be really weird. Everybody stand. All right. So this is like a weird thing that I would always do in the labs. I would be like animating, and then I would stand up and be like, how does a body move when you do this? And like literally would just be doing this over and over in the labs. So I'm not gonna make you do that. I actually just hurt myself doing it. But basically what I'm gonna have you guys do is like stand normally, just like with your hands by your side, and then take your right leg and just raise it into the air a little bit to your side. Now, tell me, what is your body doing when this is happening? Like, pay attention, like your hips, your spine, just yell stuff out. Yeah. Right. So anything else people notice like when they're doing this? Again, about like different parts of their spine, yeah.
Well, not specific to spine, but this hand rises to counterbalance with the leg.
Right. Anyone else? Yeah. So this is all good stuff that happens. And this is stuff that you want to pay attention to when you're doing walk cycles. So, or just animation in general. But I notice a lot of times, like the first time people will do walk cycles, it'll be like weirdly stiff in the front. Like the torso won't move at all, and you'll sort of have legs like and it's incredibly, like, it's really hard to physically do that. So yeah, like if you raise your leg, for me, what happens is like I don't necessarily like lean super crazy far, but like my hips sort of like move over whatever leg is planted on the ground. If you're paying attention to hip rotation, whatever leg I lift up, usually the hip sort of drops to that side unless I like actively raise it upwards. And then a lot of times, like if I'm doing something else, like my spine will sort of, as my hip compensates, like my spine is bending to try to be straight and maintain my center of gravity over that foot. So that's like, again, sort of like pay attention to the torso. I'm gonna have everyone just like stand up again, and we're gonna lap the classroom twice. You guys are gonna be, I guess the awake joke is funnier in morning classes. But like, I'm just gonna like walk around the classroom, just like normal walk. Pay attention to, again, what your hips are doing, the rotation of your hips, and just like how your body is moving, what your feet are sort of doing.
Now I can't walk normally, man. I'm like,
Yeah. That's what you're paying attention to. You can also try putting your hands on your hips. And I don't know, I'm super bony. I can feel my hip bones like I can just feel what they're doing. So that's like another interesting thing to sort of pay attention to. Anyone have any like random observations about what's happening? Yeah. That's also, I guess, kind of another interesting thing to think about. It is like different people have different side things. So with the robots, they're all modeled in different proportions.
that's like the way I decide when you walk.
Yeah.
Have good balance.
But yeah, so that was pretty much my like weird, insane little just like, that was so, that scared the crap out of me. That was my weird little demo, probably all the exercise I'll ever make you guys do. But again, just like if you guys are ever, doing a motion and maybe your reference doesn't capture it or you want to make it feel more natural, get up in the labs, do whatever your robots are doing. Nobody cares. Like, I did it all the time. Nobody cares. Everyone in Urban's crazy anyway. True story. Especially around finals, like getting up and just sort of dancing in the classroom, totally normal. All right. So any questions on that before I actually do like a quickie little Maya demo? Do you guys want the lights off for that? Would that help? Okay. forget that that's a thing. This room gets like terrifyingly dark. Although it does help now that there's something on the projector instead of just eerie blue glow. Alright. So before I hop into the actual animating, I do want to touch on my sort of recommended way to set up your project when you start animating. So I know that there is 1 or 2 issues with this rig because I found them this morning in class. So my recommendation when you set up a project is, first of all, set your project. You all should be doing this by now. I'm just going to make a crappy folder in the default Maya folder, which I should actually make that folder. I have a very strange habit of not using the Maya window to make things. I just sort of like make my own folders because I'm weird. Every time. All right, so I'm just gonna go in and like make my own scenes folder. I just don't like all the other extra stuff that Maya puts in. And I'm gonna go ahead, and this is, in case anyone wants to follow along, either with your own robot or with this one. This is on the drive folder. It's just like the robot character rig in the Maya files thing. I've been sort of updating it with the most recent versions. So I'm just gonna go ahead and take this rig folder. It should be organized. I should be able to like grab this, you know, rotate it, scale it, do whatever to it. It's all set up, it's clean, there's no keyframes on anything. This is the rig I'm going to use, and I'm gonna reference this into any file I'm animating. So first of all, I'm just gonna save the thing. Rig. Great. And now I'm just gonna make a new file. Instead of importing this model, I would like to reference it. Does anybody, I know I went over this in some earlier classes, does anybody not familiar with referencing? Okay. So basically, difference between referencing and importing. Importing, it's basically like copy and paste. So like take whatever's in the original file, paste it into this one. The old file, you can do whatever to it, it's not gonna matter. Referencing is just down here, file, create reference. This basically, if anyone's familiar with programming and pointers, it's basically like a pointer to another file. So when you create your reference, it's gonna bring up the, this little menu, looks the same as the import menu, just as reference instead of import. You'll click on a file that you want to reference, in this case the rig file, double click, and you'll notice that it brings in all of the stuff kind of the same way that it would previously. So I have full control over my robot. I can like move him around, do whatever. You'll notice it does add this delightful rig prefix to everything. Is that a, oh, that's just moving mouse. The difference again between this and importing is if I grab this control, I can't delete it. If I imported this, I'd be able to delete whatever I wanted. But it's flashing an error that's basically saying like, I can't delete the thing you wanted to. It has locked or read-only children. So effectively reference stuff is kind of read-only. You can modify it, but you can't delete it. You can also, actually, and you can't rename it either. So basically you can work with it, you just can't modify that file. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. That being said, you can reference as many files as you want. You can go in and, I'm going to add like a ground plane that I can have this character walk across. I'll just set that to be reference, and I'm just going to save this and call it like animation. I don't know what I just typed, but cool. One fun thing I will note about referencing, just really quick, if y'all are working in the student versions of Maya and you reference a file created with the student version of Maya, every time you do Control-S to save, it's going to pop up that window for every single file you referenced made in student version of Maya. So if you're referencing 7 files, it will bring up that pop-up and make you click it 7 times. Just a fun fact. Anywho. So I'm just going to kind of start animating, and when we find, I'll show you sort of the beauty of referencing, especially for rigs, when we hit the error that we find. So you guys should be working off reference. I'm just going to kind of wing this. There's actually a lot of great images on Google if you just Google walk cycle. But there's sort of like more or less like 4 areas to a walk, or like four parts of a walk cycle. And I kind of look at it in terms of like the feet itself. So you'll have one foot sort of starting in the back, the other one starting in the front, and then the feet, they sort of like pass each other, and then the foot that was in the back is now in the front, vice versa, and then again they pass each other. So you can kind of think of this just like as different, like for half the walk, one foot is planted on the ground, the other half of that walk, or that step, the foot is moving forward. So if you're ever sort of looking at these, you can kind of use these as reference if you're stuck on a walk cycle or just like looking for images to help break it down. You'll also notice that like most of these, you can see the torso or like the hips are sort of like swaying up and down as this character walks. And that is in, again, pretty much most of these images. So I'm just gonna kind of use these as weird references as I'm doing things. So we have the sort of first step of the walk cycle, which is again, the sort of first contact with the feet. So we have one where it's starting to peel itself off the ground, and the other one right as the heel is sort of touching down. So if you guys are working off reference, you can sort of start this wherever you want. I'm just going to sort of copy that image because it's there. So what I'm going to do, and how the order you animate stuff is completely up to you guys. I like if I have part of the body touching the ground, like the feet, or if I have hands planted on something, I'll usually start animating with that first and just make sure that like I can physically stretch my robot as far as I need to. So in this case, like I'm just going to sort of move the foot out. I might move this one back a little bit, and I'm just going to be lazy and keyframe everything. And I also want to move my torso. So like clearly that's really weird looking. I'm just going to like bring that down a little bit. And you just kind of like work things. The beauty, if you guys have watched the videos with the FK foot setup, that one was a little bit rambly. I was having lots of technical errors, so I do apologize for that. But the really, really convenient thing is like I can just scroll this little ball attribute up, and it just automatically does like a really nice motion for that foot. So I would actually recommend, a few people in my last class brought up the question, if you don't have that like second little foot joint like you would in a real foot, what should you do for the foot control? My answer to that is I would pretty much recommend, like, imagine that just didn't exist. So what you want to do is set up the foot control pretty much the same way. You would set up your little heel group, and then one for your tippy toes, and then you would just have no, ball joints or toe joints or anything like that in between. If anyone needs help converting that, I can look at that as well. But anywho, so we also have this, and again, we have this like heel roll. So I'm able to just like really nicely sort of pivot this on the character's heel. I would, however, love to know, okay. So you can see, again, function of IK functionality, why I sort of like doing the legs first. You'll notice that until I get that torso pushed over far enough, this leg will not connect with the ground, and I like to know that sooner rather than later. So I'm just gonna go through, I'll set my first batch of keyframes here. I'm just gonna turn on auto key because I'm lazy. And then what I'm gonna do is basically go over to frame 24. If you're doing game stuff, you can work in 30 frames a second instead. But I'm just gonna assume that there is one step happening basically per 24 frames or per second. And I'm just gonna literally take these keyframes and also the torso and just move them all sort of over somewhere else. So right now we have this really, really genuinely awful sort of scrubbing motion happening. And at this point, I'm just going to kind of come back in and be like, all right, so this second spot, about halfway between those, frame 12, is what's going to happen. So we have, here's first contact. I'm going to kind of ignore this. I'm looking for second contact here. So I need the foot that was previously behind to be in front. I'm just going to kind of grab that and swap these positions. It's going to be very, very awkward. Haha, buttons clicking. So we have this. It looks completely insane, as it should. I will go through and just like zero out the heel roll and then like, play with this a little bit, fix this. So a lot of this is just sort of going through and, playing with settings. It's a lot of sort of setting up the basic, don't start lagging on me again. Okay, save this. This was being so awful in my previous class. It was unbelievably annoying. I mostly just sort of want to get to the point where I can show you what it looks like if you have like really slidey, weird animations. Like obviously this needs more keyframes. But what you want to avoid, like if this foot is planted on the ground, it should stay planted on the ground. So what I would be looking for in this case, like, again, like this shouldn't, right now it's kind of sliding, which isn't really what I want. So I'm going to say maybe until, you know, frame 4 or something like that. This position should stay the same. So I'm just going to kind of be, the lag. I'm just going to kind of be lazy and just like copy this attribute and paste it on frame 4. That's not how pasting works. And you'll notice again that it sort of stays planted. You will notice hopefully that brings up some weird issues with what's called IK popping. So you'll notice like if you scrub between these two frames, right on frame 4, the hips are not quite in the position where they need to be, and basically the IK leg is being pulled or like popped straight. It's a pretty noticeable in animations if you're watching things, so you do want to go out of your way to sort of avoid that. One way, does anyone actually have any ideas about how to fix that in this case? Okay. There's a few different ways. The easiest one would sort of be going through and rotating the hips. So right now, I mean, this is like obviously still a pretty janky walk cycle, but if we scrub through this, look how gloriously awkward that is without any hip movement at all. So what I would usually do is, again, for this one, I'm gonna rotate the hips a little bit. You'll notice that actually gives you a lot more slack in the legs, and you can sort of go through and just continue refining things. So in this case, I would imagine the hips would maybe be rotated a little bit more like this, sort of translated off to the side a little bit, etc. And then just sort of like keep going through and doing that. Again, it's almost procedural after a point where you're just doing like a straight walk cycle. And Maya is being like unbearably laggy. So I'm just gonna really quick show you, there's actually a setting that I completely forgot to put on the toes, which I realized in my earlier class, and I was like, oh crap, that's bad. And this is where referencing comes in really, really handy. So I'm just gonna go ahead, I'm gonna go ahead and close Maya and reopen it, and hopefully that will fix the lag. Do you guys find the lab computers to be really laggy? Like, is this... Yep. Great. Is that a consistent problem, or is that just like one or two of them? Oh great, it's not responding. Because I've noticed it didn't used to be this bad, but like within the last week or two, it seems like after I've been in Maya for 5 minutes, it starts lagging uncontrollably. And it's very prohibitive, honestly. But basically, again, if you find an issue with your rig in Maya, you should be able to just sort of open that rig and fix whatever issue it is, and it will update in the other files. So if you retexture something in your rig, if you add controls, add attributes on controls, that will be reflected in whatever files you're referencing. So again, if you're setting up stuff for your final, you wouldn't need to like re-import your rig every time you found an error. You could just update the rig file and it should perpetuate those updates. But basically, like in this case, again, I have the setup for a tippy toe ball roll. I just didn't put it in. So I'm gonna go edit, add attribute. I'll just call it tippy toe, which I spelled like a maniac. And I'll set this up, for those of you again that got through the foot, I'm just gonna set this up the exact same way. I'll just click on the control itself, general editors, connection editor. And in this case, I have absolutely no idea where I put this attribute. Benefits of good naming, I know that I named it tippy toe, so if I search for tip and expand this, it should tell me exactly where these tippy toe attributes are, which is very, very handy, especially if you just like lose stuff like I do. So I'm gonna grab this. I'm doing my left ankle, so I wanna grab that left tippy toe, scroll down to this new attribute that I've added, and I want to attach that into the rotate rotate Z of this group. And once I do that, I should be able to scrub through this, and you'll see that it's just doing this really, really nice thing where it just like picks up its toe on the ground. And that was very, very handy for walking. Didn't put it in the original file, so I'm just going to go ahead and save this. Again, this is just my rig.ma file. And if I open the animation file that I had previously, it should, if I click on these controls, you'll see it now has this tippy putapa attribute that I've added on it. And I'm then free to animate that as I, would, as if it was there pretty much all along. You'll also notice that, like, since this was put in after all these keyframes were set, it's not actually keyed. So you would have to go in and do that. But that's like, I don't know. Are you guys interested in seeing some more sort of like live animating, or would you rather do more open lab for rig fixes?
Open lab.
Cool. All right, I'll wrap this up in 2 seconds. Only thing I do want to mention about referencing, it is very dependent on naming things. So as an example, like you should usually be able, if you're in your rig and there's like an issue with a controller, you should be able to delete that controller. And as long as you put one back that is named the same thing, and ideally is in the same-ish spot, it should transfer those animations to your actual animation file with your referenced rig. If you delete a controller and then open your animation file, those animations for that controller is gone. As far as I've found, there's no good way to get that back unless you... I was actually going to say unless you don't save that animation file, but pretty sure I've actually seen it delete it anyway. So do be aware of that. If you delete something in your rig file, that change will sort of perpetuate itself, and like you may end up accidentally deleting animations. So do be aware of that. The only other thing that I want to sort of like suggest and or caution to you is I would highly, 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 highly recommend when you are doing rigging. So right now if we look at my Goofy Scenes folder, I have this rig.ma. I'm just going to save this. If I need to update my rig, I'm going to override this file from a versioned file of the rig that I'm making changes to. So by that, I just mean, like, if you say rename this, like this is rig version 1. Yes. Okay. This is rig version 1. If you make a change, save it as rig version 2. And if you need to update your rig file, override this rig.ma with whatever your updated rig version is. The reason I suggest doing that is every once in a while, if you overwrite a rig file, it will break like your entire animation and delete all of it, or like something really weird will happen. And if you don't have a version of a functional rig to go back to, all of that data is lost. And that actually happened to someone last quarter. They did like hours and hours of animating, overwrote the rig folder, and then all of their animation that they've been working on for like a week was totally gone, and they had to redo it. Which is why I do highly suggest always keep versions of your files floating around. Make sure if something goes wrong with your rig file, you have a previous functional version to go back to. Does that make sense? Cool. That's pretty much my bit. I would also suggest just working out with your teammates and maybe figuring out some kind of file structure you like keeping, because your rig will, if you put it in a different place, you'll need to go through some extra steps to hook up the reference, and it's kind of just safer and easier to have everything in one spot if you need to file share or anything like that. So it might not be a bad idea to do that. I do have, if you look, I think at the very bottom of the robot doc, there's a bunch of sort of suggested file structures. It's like what I usually personally use. So you can reference that if you want to, but that's pretty much a weird bit on animating. Apart from, I recommend using FK for the arms. I think it's honestly easier and faster unless your arms need to hold something. Any questions on animating, assignments, any other random things? Cool. Was anybody having like universal issues with like a particular thing in a rig that you guys want to go over? Yeah.
FKI
Cool. Anybody else have interest in doing sort of like live demoing, setting up an IK-FK switch in an arm? Cool. All right, so I saw a few nods and a few actual hands. So I'm just going to pop into my rig file and do that really quick. If Maya opens, tra-la-la-la-la. File read in 3.4 seconds. It said 30 seconds ago without opening the file. Is Maya this bad on the, like, is it this bad on the lab computers? I feel like this is terrible. This is genuinely terrible. What if I've never had to force quit Maya so much. At least it opens fast on these computers, though. Like, that's kind of convenient. Alright, we got a thing. I'm just gonna dump my rig into this. Tra-la-la. Alright, so again, there's sort of two different setups for the arms. I actually have them set up differently. So this is, if you guys are looking at the file, the character's right arm is the one with the sort of basic IK-FK switch. The right arm, sorry, the character's left arm is a demonstration of the fancy one with like 3 joints. It's a little bit more modular if you want to like do extra stuff with it in the future, kind of fun to practice with. All I'm going to do, I'm just going to hide the skin and go through and delete all of the IK handles. I'm just going to be unnecessarily aggressive and delete literally all of them, like a crazy person. So theoretically what we should have now is, and actually I'm going to, all right, so that actually shouldn't be hooked up to anything. Great, I think. All right, so theoretically what we should have now is this random floating IK controller that's not attached to anything, and hopefully functional FK limbs. That's highly questionable. And this is presumably what most of you guys are starting with. Most people do FK. Video I did does FK first. So if you want to attach an IK handle into this, you usually just go to your rigging menu, pull up the IK handle tool. And again, you guys want rotation plane solver. Everything else I kind of leave default. Just click on the shoulder and then the wrist. And that should give you this little IK handle that you can drag around. You will notice that the FK handles, like if you, or sorry, the FK controls, if you start rotating them, it does some weird stuff where it starts like snapping things around. So you need to like hook up some extra stuff to sort of fix that. Is that the sort of like issue that people are having with like things breaking weird and like snapping? Okay. I'm just gonna keep going. Stop me if you guys have questions. So really quick, I'm just gonna like shift this around. The attribute in question that we want to look at is if you go under the IK solver attributes, this little IK blend. If we toggle between this, you'll notice that the arm sort of straightens. Excellent. Breaking rigs. So I'm actually not gonna lie, I figured out how to do this particular simpler setup like not a long time ago, so I've not set this up a lot of times. All right, so in that case, I actually have no idea what I did. I'm just gonna delete the entire IK handle and just put it back in again. When in doubt, that's the sort of usual default thing I do. And I'm actually just gonna go ahead and just constrain the control with a point constraint. And that way I can just move the control instead of doing the IK handle itself. So I should, hopefully, be able to move this around, and presumably this will also, actually it seems to have stopped controlling the skeleton altogether. This is ideally what you would expect if that was happening. To sort of have like the FK being overwritten by the IK. If I click into this handle, theoretically, and now I grab the IK blend, you'll see that it sort of toggles back and forth between IK and FK. So this is the functionality that I want. You can see it's actually also, as you're sort of toggling, it gives you this like preview of what the IK skeleton looks like, which is kind of cool. But basically I'm just going to hook up a few things and use this control to drive the change in those joints. Also, if you guys see me get to a part where you guys have been like having specific issues, let me know. Because the few times I've hooked this up, it's actually, for once, worked beautifully. And I'm curious to see like what issues you guys have been having. I did see someone who like hooked this up and their geometry exploded and like started spiraling off if they moved things, which was pretty weird, and that's the thing I would have to like sit down with and troubleshoot, but anywho. Alright. So just go back and make sure, again, all your controllers should be zeroed out, so you can just pop them back into T-pose if you need to. I have this attribute already created here for this IKFK switch, which right now is doing nothing since I've deleted the original IK handle. So what I'm going to do is, once again, go into my connection editor, grab this little switch control on the left, and you want the IK handle itself on the right. So I'm just going to go down, grab this IKFK switch, and hook it up to IK blend, which is right here. That should theoretically be hooked up. So right now what we have is, if we go ahead and move this, right now the switch is set to 0, so the IK blend is set to 0. Basically that means the IK handle is not functional, so it's behaving as an FK rig setup. You'll notice if I go ahead and like move this around, this is being very, very much FK. I would love to know why my thumb control is flying off into space. But if we go grab that switch, we should be able to toggle between them, and theoretically this should be swapping to IK functionality, which for some reason it is not doing. Hooray. Great point constraint of the wrist control. This an issue anyone had? Where it just like doesn't toggle properly? Interesting. Well, that's very gross. Alright, so honestly, this is the point where I would probably just be like, why is this a thing? Let me see if the IK handle itself moves anything. Perhaps I've like legit just broken the IK handle. I'm just gonna casually put in a new one for a third time. This is like honestly kind of a fast enough setup where it's not too bad to just sort of like reset up this particular control. So I'm just gonna, I've already connected the IK blend with the IKFK switch. So hopefully if I move this around and then do the toggle, it's still broken. Amazing. The beauty of live demos. All right. I have this really strange feeling that if I closed Maya and opened it, this would work again. Does anybody want to watch me sit here and try to like brute force fix this? I have no idea how long it would take. I'm gonna opt to not do that because I have no idea how long it would take. The only other thing that I want to sort of point out about this particular setup, whatever rig you do for your IKFK switches, you should be able to control the wrist. If you move your IK handle, so like do this arm, I swear to God, if you broke all of my IK switches. It did! Oh no, because I deleted all the IK handles because I was being really heavy-handed. Great. But basically for this particular setup, you'll need to make a little set-driven key with a parent constraint on the wrist. And you'll notice like if I go in and I click on that parent constraint, there are two things affecting it. One is the FK wrist control, and the other is the IK wrist control. And all I've done is go through and I've toggled the weights of these. So I'm just gonna go ahead and like set a quickie little keyframe and another keyframe. And if I click on this, so watch what happens as I scroll through. You can see this is basic FK functionality, so the wrist is being controlled by the FK control. And as I toggle through, it's sort of theoretically scrubbing between them. You can see that as I scrub, it sort of becomes dominant where there's no FK control and it's behaving totally as IK, and you get that nice sort of interpolation between them. So all I did for that is just go into the animation menu, key, set-driven key, set, and that has taken a very long time to load. Interesting. I'm actually not entirely sure what I just clicked on, but normally it'll bring up a little menu and you can just sort of like manually set all those values so that when you scrub through this switch, not only is it controlling the IK blend of your IK handle, but it's also doing your sort of predefined swap between the IK and FK risk controls so that you don't need to animate that every single time you do the switch. So that was a really janky demo. I no idea if that helped. Does anybody have questions about anything I did or want to see anything else? Okay. All right, so if that's the case, we're just going to break into Open Lab. So it seems like we have about 2 hours and 5 minutes left. What I'm going to do, I did this in my last class,